Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening and welcome to the show. It's budget night tonight. An extended Credlin view will run right up to 7:30 when the Treasurer will get to his feet to hand down his second budget. However, we won't just cover the budget. There's lots of other headlines I want to make sure you are across. Here's a little of what's coming up on Credlin tonight. Deakin University in Victoria announces it will break up pro-Palestinian encampments as protesters declare they will resist. It comes as the tertiary sector faces heavy cuts to their overseas student numbers in tonight's budget. But will the government do more than just talk tough? I'll discuss that with Chris Uhlmann a little later on. The worrying push to lower the burden of proof in rape trials. They could see cases conducted in a way that have experts warning it could set a dangerous precedent. Legal expert Chris Merritt with more, as well as the latest on the trial against accused Islamic State terrorist, Australian-born Neil Prakash. Plus, you won't believe how defensive the Prime Minister got in Parliament today during question time. Asked a fairly straightforward question on that near miss with a Chinese fighter jet. Pretty rich from the Prime Minister too, to demand that Andrew Hastie, a former SAS veteran turned Liberal MP, do more, said the Prime Minister, to stick up for Australia. And as I said, lots to get through as we await Jim Chalmers' budget speech. As always with the budget, it's the devil in the detail and who you trust to manage the economy.
Our big priority here is to put the people front and centre. We know that people are doing it tough, and that's why more help is on the way tonight.
Look, the Reserve Bank has set the alarm bells off for good reason. They've said inflation is going up, not down right now. That's what we saw in the last figures, and we need to see a pathway to tame it.
But first, tonight, in about an hour and a half, the budget will be brought down for a second time by Wayne Swan's former staffer, Jim Chalmers. Indeed, Chalmers was the Chief of Staff when Julia Gillard's then Treasurer promised this.
The 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight are a powerful endorsement of the strength of our economy, resilience of our people and the success of our policies.
I was there in the room at the time, and we know now, don't we? He never delivered a surplus, let alone the 4 he promised. Earlier today, in the dance of 1,000 veils that we get around budgets, we were told that tonight's surplus would be some $9 billion. Well, in that respect, Chalmers is better than his old boss. But how real is this surplus? $9.3 billion, we're told. That's 9,000 million. Well, it sounds a lot. But given Australia's $3 trillion economy, it isn't. Indeed, it's scarcely 1% of total Commonwealth debt, and that's racing towards $1 trillion or 1,000 billion. And all a surplus means is that in this current financial year, as a country, we have earned more than we've spent, $9.3 billion more. But put that against our current debt, use that $9.3 billion to pay a little bit off what we owe, and it's a drop in the ocean. Our debt would go from $892.1 billion to $888.8 billion. See what I mean by a drop in the ocean? Now, most in the media fall for the spin of a surplus, but when our national debt is that big and the surplus is that small, well, it's practically a rounding error. It's the equivalent of you perhaps finding $1,000 in your bank at a time when you owe $100,000 and have got very little prospect of paying any of it back. And in any event, this Labor surplus is the equivalent of a win at the races. It's the result of luck, not policy. A surplus produced by continued sky-high prices and hence big tax revenues for iron ore and resources such as coal and gas that Labor wants to demonise, wants to make us leave in the ground. Now, there are some political tricks that you need to know as the government tries tonight to drown us in spin. Some of the other tricks I want you to know about, the other tricks that Labor will deploy to make their budget books look better than they really are. They will move on future fund returns. I'll put them on budget. So using the investing skill of recent Future Fund Chairman Peter Costello to bolster Labor's government revenue when Labor politicians had nothing to do with those future fund decisions. It's what they did last year too when they got themselves to a surplus. And if Josh Frydenberg had done the same, put the future fund returns on budget in his last budget as Treasurer, well, he would have got there with a surplus as well. What other tricks do Labor have up their sleeve? Well, I guarantee you that some spending, such as future Made in Australia grants to private companies, well, they will all be parked off budget. They'll be put into their capital accounts, even though these grants are never likely to produce a commercial return. And they will play all the usual games with immigration, ramping up the intake to artificially inflate economic growth, because in simple terms, more people grows the economy, even though they don't necessarily boost GDP per person. The real reason most of us right now feel poorer, even though the economy as a whole has been growing, albeit slowly, is because we've been in a per capita recession, with GDP going backwards per person for the past 4 quarters. This morning, supposedly to bring down total migration from 500,000 to 250,000 a year, the government was spinning that they'll put caps on the number of overseas students. Now, that's because everyone who's here for more than a couple of months, including all of these overseas students, well, they need a house, a job, and a way to get around. But it remains to be seen how effective any student numbers caps will be, given that the government wants to be acting here, or seem to be acting, without being sure it really wants to act. Public concerns about record immigration have to be addressed, but actually cutting immigration could mean we plunge into an official rather than just an unofficial or per capita recession. And it would mean trouble with all those universities and others for whom overseas students seeking immigration rather than an educational outcome have become a big business model. But the basic failing of this budget, based on all the pre-budget spin, will be that it bakes in permanent structural spending on the back of this temporary, accidental day at the races sort of surplus. Prior to the pandemic, Commonwealth spending averaged under 25% of GDP. Now, it blew out to 27% of GDP during the pandemic, and under Labor, long after the pandemic, it's hardly come back. There are already close to 2 percentage points of GDP in extra locked-in long-term spending, and tonight the government will add to that. There'll be more for the states on housing and health, more for the states to take the pressure off the NDIS and allow the federal government to then pretend it's reined in the costs of the NDIS, even though it's just changed the spending from one account to the other. More to subsidise the wages of people in the so-called care economy. But why on earth should taxpayers be helping to pay the wages of people employed in private business? That's beyond me. Perhaps because childcare and aged care are 2 key recruitment areas for the unions, maybe that's the answer. Tonight, expect to see more help for low-income earners with their skyrocketing power bills, even though it's the government's own policy to get to net zero at breakneck speed, which is putting bills up in the first place. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has assured his caucus that it's a true Labor budget. Based on what I know, I suspect he's right, but one thing it won't be is a budget in the Labor tradition of Bob Hawke, who was the last Labor PM to preside over a budget surplus. And in Hawke's case, it was a surplus generated by economic reform and genuine spending restraint. There won't be too much spending restraint tonight. Instead, this government will spend up big with your money to try and buy back your vote. They're struggling in the polls, and the Prime Minister's hope is that you'll fall for his spin. Well, we'll see. All right, let's get the headlines now. As I said, a lot around, not just the budget. Georgia Simpson with the details.
Good evening. Treasurer Jim Chalmers will deliver his 3rd budget tonight, and it's set to be a budget in the black. A $9.3 billion surplus for this financial year is locked in, but more help is also being promised for Australians struggling to keep up with the cost of living.
I say to people who are doing it tough and to the most vulnerable people in our community that help is on the way in the budget. The tax cuts are the biggest part of the cost of living relief in the budget, but not the only part of the cost of living relief in the budget. You know, our big priority here is to put the people front and centre.
It will be a balancing act for Treasurer Chalmers, who's rejecting suggestions budget sweeteners will make inflation worse. Forecasts in this economic blueprint will show inflation falling within the target range of 2 to 3% by the end of the year.
And this magic pudding exercise by Jim Chalmers that somehow his assumptions are better than the Reserve Bank's, nobody believes that.
Defence whistleblower David McBride has been jailed for leaking classified documents to the media. The former military lawyer will spend a minimum 2 years and 3 months behind bars. McBride pleaded guilty to 3 charges, including one of stealing Commonwealth information relating to documents about Australian Special Forces soldiers committing alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. He'll be eligible for parole in August 2026. The New South Wales government has announced major reform to the state's bail laws to better protect domestic violence survivors.
Not everyone will support these changes, but we believe they do balance the rights of an individual and his or her presumption of innocence, as well as the right of a victim survivor to be safe from harassment, intimidation or further assault at the hands of a previous intimate partner.
Under the changes, it will be harder for alleged perpetrators to get bail, and electronic monitoring will also be expanded to serious domestic violence offenders out on bail.
Electronic monitoring is effective in reducing reoffending and reducing offending, so we should absolutely look at that. We should also be looking at significant investment in services for women who are at risk. We should be looking at early intervention, we should be looking at prevention, and we should be looking at those longer-term behavioural change and cultural change programs.
The changes come after the death of Molly Ticehurst. The 28-year-old mother was allegedly murdered by her former partner, who was out on bail at the time.
All right, for more on what we can expect in tonight's budget, I'm joined now by Sky News host, Chief Election Analyst, Tom Connell. Well, Tom, a different set of numbers tonight. It's about the budget, not the psephology stuff you love to run us through. But let's get some top-line budget numbers out there to set the scene. We'll start with some of the economic data. We've got a $3 trillion economy now in Australia. Right now, our debt's running at $892 billion. I want to put that into perspective. When John Howard and Peter Costello paid off our national debt, back then they paid off $96 billion, so about a tenth of the debt burden as it stands tonight. We've already had that leaked to this morning. We can expect tonight a $9 billion surplus, but after that surplus, we're told it's deficits as far as the eye can see, meaning a lot of red ink, Tom.
Yeah, there will be, because there remains a structural deficit. Now, to break that down, because your viewers will hear that term a lot, basically it means if everything's normal, if we're getting a standard price in particular for the things we sell, including in particular iron ore, coal, things like this, we are in deficit in a normal year. We're not this year because we're still getting a very high price, but the price of iron ore has been coming off, and that means in future years we're not expecting the rivers of gold to keep flowing. So $9 billion surplus this year, $22 billion last year. Now, they're good results. They don't happen automatically, but you've got to remember as well, Labor could not have just spent the money as it came in. That would have added massively to inflation. There's already debate around what their spending will do to inflation anyway. If they'd spent all the money, well, there would be just widespread criticism throughout. So, yes, $30 billion over the last 2 years. That's a positive result for the nation's budget. What we do know is there's going to be bigger deficits in forward estimates. We don't know yet the number, so that will be crucial, Peter. It was previously estimated to be $73 billion over those latter 3 years. Now we'll get the next 4 years, so we're bracing for that figure to be even bigger. And think of some of that spending that only grows: defence, NDIS. These are the big ticket items that are going to grow the deficits in those years.
And just to underscore Tom's point there about a structural deficit, it's like you at home earning your wage, and from your wage not being able to pay your mortgage or your rent and put food on the table, all the things you'd normally have to spend over the year. The only way you can keep your head above water is to take a second job or to do extra overtime. That's how tough a structural deficit is in household terms, and that's what we face as a country. Let's get into the budget detail. I mean, budgets are just a function like households. Revenue, what we get in as money, and then expenditure, what we spend. It's, politicians love to make it sound more complicated than that. It isn't. In simple revenue terms, Tom, run us through our key income earners.
Yeah, well, think of some of the things that I mentioned there. The crucial element is a lot of these parameters sort of slowly tick up, but it's the ones that balloon up. So think of the price we're getting for iron ore. So think of all of our exports and how much they've been going up. They're huge earners for iron ore, for coal. Also, though, Peter, at the moment, international education, it's an export because students come here and pay us money from offshore. So it's weird to think of an export, but it is. Now, there's some concern around whether or not that revenue will be hit. There's a cap coming, at least a soft cap on international students. If unis want to go beyond a certain level, they have to provide proof or extra accommodation for those students. We know how tight the rental squeeze has been and the concern around immigration. So that's a balancing act for the government on that particular factor as well. So when we're looking at that particular element, one other thing I'll tell you is there was previous speculation of doubling the visa, $710 you pay just for the application for a visa to come here as an international student. There was widespread speculation that was going to double, and it's already in some cases twice the level of countries such as New Zealand where we're competing with. It seems as though the government might have been spooked. I'm not sure. We never know what's in the document until it is, but they're not going ahead with that, was the latest information we were getting on that. Of course, the big ticket items are the tax we bring in as well. And if you think about the tax we're getting, we are so reliant on income tax skills. So yes, the tax cuts, stage 3, the reworked Labor one's coming in, but we're still getting a massive amount from income tax because bracket creep has been on steroids lately with inflation contributing to higher wages. And we still get about double the amount of income tax, more than $300 billion compared to company tax, $155 billion. And that is way out of whack compared to other OECD countries. So we're still highly reliant on slugging workers' income tax to make the budget's it's adding up this year. It doesn't add up most years in future years, so I'm not going to say to make it add up, but to just get it close at least.
So if you feel at home you're doing the heavy lifting and business is not, you're absolutely right. That's borne out in the budget. In terms of expenditure, we've got some big ticket portfolios. You mentioned before that the structural deficit. There's also structural spending in those portfolios. I mean, if you get to pension age and you're entitled to a pension, whether the government's budgeted for it or not, you will get one. So these are the things that you can only really curtail spending in these big portfolios if you are politically prepared to take things off people. I think more and more, Tom, we're not prepared to do that. Run us through those portfolios.
The biggest one by far is the NDIS, Peter. This is blown out by tens of billions a year in the latest forecast by the year 2030. And the issue here is mainly who's on it. Initially, it was meant to be people with a severe and permanent disability. We've seen the reality be a lot more people, and some staggering stats about how many young boys, for example, are on the NDIS. Now, the government has said it wants to rein that in, but it's a very slow process. By 2025, they want to reduce the increase annually to 8%. That's not cutting it by 8%, that's the increase annually. So that's how slowly they're planning on turning the NDIS ship around, if you like. So there's a huge increase there. There is a big increase in defence, but intriguingly, not in the forward estimates. Most of the spending there is going out over the 10 years because they're delaying or cutting projects in the short term. There's been some criticism from the coalition on that because supposedly we need to be ready in the short term for a conflict with China or similar. And yet most of the spending is over that 10-year period. Think of other things, though. We've got childcare, massive increases to childcare pay, which the government's footing. Aged care is the same as well. A decision recently in those areas where you're talking about pay increases of 25%, and it's either parents or the government that pays for that. The centres say they're sort of running at the margins anyway. And there's also a new hospital agreement. Will that be factored in tonight, for example, because that's something the government needs to strike in the future, and you could be talking of billions of dollars extra there, given where health inflation is at.
I'll go into some other topics, but just before we do, the last thing that I'm going to focus on, and I'll look very carefully at this tonight, given how close we are to a potential federal election. This hollow log, decisions taken, not yet announced. It's where governments agree money in the room at the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet. They park the money in there. They know what they're likely to spend it on. It'll be an election pork barrel. We don't know yet. But the biggest indication, if they're preparing to go early, will be how much money is sitting there in those line items where we're given no detail, isn't it, Tom?
Exactly. If that's massive, then, as you allude to, the government's thinking, hey, maybe we won't have another budget as expected next year in March or April, as has become almost the strange new normal in politics in Canberra because of the electoral cycle, it's sort of become do a last quick budget before an election. So if that's really big, if that's tens of billions of dollars, that might be a factor. I'll just say as well, Peter, we do understand that there's going to be both rent, another increase in the Commonwealth rental allowance, which was not a big surprise, but also an energy rebate, and this one is going to go to every single Australian and about 1 million small businesses. Now, what's different about that is previously it was half-half with the states, and it was people basically on welfare payments, so younger people on New Start, older people, pensioners, but this time it's going to every single household. That makes it expensive, and it will obviously bring down headline inflation. What's fascinating about that in this whole debate is whilst it brings down headline inflation, the RBA, when it talks about rate cuts, it looks at the trimmed mean. So if it sees, for example, rent and energy going quite a way down in terms of inflation, but they know that that's a temporary subsidy, they're not just going to go, great, inflation's done, we're going to instigate a rate cut. So it's possible that Jim Chalmers and Treasury are right on headline inflation, but we still don't see those rate cuts because the trimmed mean hasn't actually come down.
And of course, when they're low-income earners and they're getting that extra bit of money there for rent assistance, they'll spend it, which is the inflationary worry the Reserve Bank has that the Treasurer says is not real. We'll see what happens, Tom. Thank you as always. Good luck with budget night. I know you will be busy, and we'll talk to you just before we go to the Treasurer a little later in the show. All right, the federal government is considering a move to a civil alternative for rape criminal trials. It's a move that would see the standard of proof lowered from beyond reasonable doubt, which is the criminal standard, to the civil standard, which is balance of probabilities. The suggestion comes from members of an advisory group set up by the Attorney General, who also want to crack down on inappropriate, they call it, defence questioning in rape trials and the introduction of specialist sexual assault courts. Now, it's a dangerous precedent, so says some experts. One of those joining me now, the Australian's legal affairs contributor, Chris Merritt. Well, Chris, presumably rape would still remain a crime, but it wouldn't be dealt with to the criminal trial standard. So how's that supposed to work?
Badly. Rape is far, far too serious to be treated in such an appalling manner as to lower the standard to the civil standard. Rape is a very serious offence, and it needs to be treated like that. Lowering it to the civil standard equates it with relatively trivial offences, and that sends exactly the wrong signal to perpetrators and also to people, the victims of sexual assault. This is completely wrong-headed. It tends to equate the ability to secure a conviction with justice. You can lower the standard of proof and lower the rules all you like, but it would raise doubts about those who are convicted. There'd always be a question mark about whether they really are guilty of this offence or whether they've been subjected to such a watered down law that it would cease to have much deterrent effect.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember as a law student when rape inside marriage was not considered rape, Chris, and feminist lawyers and women, a lot of men too, fought for it to be considered or determined as rape whenever it occurs. And it was such an achievement to get that criminal standard. I can't understand why you'd give that away.
Yeah, look, this debate is completely wrong-headed. It's not an argument between complainants and defendants. It's an argument about should the state take very seriously these accusations. It's a matter for the state, not for complainants to secure a victory in court.
Agreed.
We're talking about criminal justice, putting someone inside for a period of years. And if you're going to do that, it must be beyond all reasonable doubt. This balance of probabilities nonsense for that test is not good enough to lock people up. And it also, from the perspective of complainants, it's just completely wrong-headed. Complainants need to have the certainty and need to be able to show the world that beyond reasonable doubt they were the victim of a sexual assault. And this is heading in the wrong direction.
What can you tell me about this issue with Walter Sofronoff? Because now, I mean, he of course was the lawyer expert who looked into the trial of Bruce Lerman, the ACT rape trial, the abandoned rape trial. He's now before the ACT Integrity Commissioner. Allegations that he leaked copies of his report to the media. It's a corruption investigation. It's pretty serious. What can you tell us?
I'm very troubled by this. On the face of things, it looks like forum shopping. The inquiries, the Integrity Commission in the ACT can receive referrals from anybody. We don't know who referred this to the Integrity Commission, but I make this point. In August last year, the Chief Minister of the ACT accused Mr Sofronoff of breaching the Inquiries Act by leaking his report on an embargoed basis to a couple of journalists. He said he was going to take legal advice. It's a criminal offence under the provision he outlined. There's been nothing heard since then. So presumably if he did take legal advice, it didn't result in proceedings in a criminal court. Now, the inquiry by the Integrity Commission is going to examine exactly the same accusation that did not give rise to criminal proceedings, but it would be on a lower standard of proof. And this vague test of corruption is what the Integrity Commission will apply. So I'm very worried about this, and I expect, well, I hope that next month when Mr Sofronoff addresses the annual dinner of the Rule of Law Institute, that his address on the rule of law hopefully will cover some of this, because the way it looks to me, it raises doubts about whether the criminal law of the ACT is a guide as to what you can and cannot do. If Mr Sofronoff complied with the law, the Inquiries Act, and there's no evidence, there's no accusation that he didn't. In fact, the lack of action by the authorities to bring criminal proceedings against him suggests strongly that he did not breach any law. But he finishes up in front of this lower inquiry on a lower standard of proof. I'd like to know who referred him to the Commission. I'm very worried about it.
Let me ask you about the drama at the trial of accused former Islamic State terrorist Neil Prakash. He's facing 6 terror-related offences in Australia. The courts heard evidence from 2 of his former acquaintances who described how he first became enticed by extreme views promoted at a controversial mosque in Melbourne's southeast. Now, Chris, we keep hearing some, not all mosques, but plenty of them, are promoting hate speech. So I've got to ask you, given the laws we have in this country against it, given what we've seen with allegations of radicalised teenagers in recent weeks and months, why on earth is it more being done?
Because the law's a mess. That's it in a nutshell. At least in New South Wales, the Minns government has tried a couple of times to fix up the law on the law covering the most serious aspect here, and this is incitement to violence, incitement to racial or religious violence. They've got an inquiry going. But federally, and this is the law that covers everybody, the law is an atrocious mess. There are, on the face of things, provisions in the Commonwealth Criminal Code that cover incitement to racial and religious violence and cover encouraging or praising terrorism. But there's also this mad provision, this mad defence, which actually, in my view, makes the law unworkable. It's a good faith defence. The way it works is, yes, you can be found to have incited racial or religious violence or to have encouraged or praised acts of terrorism. But if you argue and prove that you did so in good faith, that's it. There's no possibility of a conviction. Now, I haven't seen any move by the Commonwealth to review the criminal code and try and tighten up this law in much the same way that the Minns government in New South Wales is trying to get things in order. There's been no prosecutions, no one's been arrested, and we've definitely seen incitement from mosques, particularly in Sydney. You just got to go onto YouTube and you can see evidence of it, but there's been no charges.
Oh yeah, I have, don't you worry.
The law is the problem.
Absolutely. Chris, we'll leave it there. We'll come back to this one, I'm sure. It's a big theme. It's part of the big problem we've got in this country at the moment. Chris Merritt, thank you. All right, after the break, why, contrary to what Labor is saying, record immigration numbers are at the core of their budget bottom line. Plus, why more states should be following New South Wales' lead when it comes to bail laws. More on that a bit later. Welcome back. Still to come, proof that if governments want to, they can change bail laws. All credit to New South Wales in this regard. It's now beyond time for the other states to follow suit. But first, for all Labor's talk about reducing immigration numbers, we're in fact heading in the opposite direction, with record immigration ostensibly making tonight's budget look in much better shape than it actually is. The reality is, of course, we're in a per capita recession. In fact, it's been 4 quarters now of negative growth. The Prime Minister out on radio this morning claiming, though, he's got a plan.
Are you going to, as promised, are you going to cut immigration next year and the year after, and if so, by how much?
Yes, we are. We want to bring it down to around about half of where it peaked. You'll see a range of measures in tonight's budget aimed at doing that, including a clampdown on integrity issues when it comes to higher education. That's really important.
For more on this, I'm joined now by former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. Well, Barnaby, the Prime Minister doesn't take a trick. He talks there about bringing it down down to about half where it is now. Well, that'll take it down to about 250,000 a year. The previous record ever in Australia's history was under Kevin Rudd. It was 230,000. So he's still, even if he halves it, keeping it at absolutely record highs.
Well, he said he has a cunning plan. He sounds like Baldrick. He's got a very cunning plan in a very bad situation. But, you know, the Prime Minister of our day, with the cunning plan man, in the last 12 months, about 599,370 students came in. We've got, if he cuts it down, even immigration down to 250,000. Where are the houses for these people? Where are the schools? Where are the new dams? Where are the hospitals? You see, people just think that people come in, but you actually got to provide not only the houses but the infrastructure to back it up. In the meantime, homelessness is making its way to Bundaberg and Tamworth. We see people sleeping rough in areas we've never seen it before. People who literally are good people, decent people, got a job, living in their car. Don't the Australians come first in all this? I mean, what's happened to that? We're ignoring. And the people who are being hurt are the poorest people. The same people he's hurting with his cultish attachment to renewables and the power prices that that are being inflicted on people. He's now inflicting on in the housing market. There's no other way he can do it. We can't build the houses. We don't have the tradesmen. We don't have the materials, and we've got a government with a cunning plan.
Just on the international students, routinely we have about 9,000 to 15,000 of them per month try and move from a student visa to head the way of Australian citizenship. Well, back in March, just the other month, it hit 35,000. So they are watching and listening to this whole debate about immigration being too high, and they're desperate to get their paperwork in, should there be any change. But Labor today called them soft caps, these caps that they'll bring in to curb the numbers of international students. You know how the numbers work in a budget. Given how much their bottom line is dependent on very high immigration, do you believe Labor?
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the skill level here. We've got Minister Giles and Claire O'Neill and the cunning plan man, Prime Minister Albanese. Truly, these are the same people who promised you a $275 reduction in your power bill, And the only thing you've got to ask yourself, because it's going to get so complicated tonight, there's going to be figures going here, there and everywhere, and every person who's got a tongue is going to give an opinion. Ask yourself this question. Are you better off or worse off than when the Labor Party came to power? Because that is the truth of the matter. If you think you're better off, great. If you think you're worse off, well, it's the cunning plan man. You've got to put the blame at his feet.
Spoken as a true accountant, you know that the devil is in the detail, Barnaby, and they deliberately design a lot of the budget papers hard to navigate. They bury things. We know there's all these decisions taken, not yet announced. It's all funny money. One thing I will look at closely tonight beyond immigration is I'm going to look at the money. Contingency reserve, yes, I look there too, and what's off budget, etc. Yeah. But I will look at the money they're putting into aerial surveillance in immigration, because that was heavily cut. We've had 3 votes now in the last few days. This is the problem, right?
6 and 6 months.
You have to say, looking at these numbers, the people smugglers are back in game, aren't they? They're back in business.
Well, we've had 6 and 6 months. You've had a massive cut to Border Force. And surprise, surprise, I mean, they're making a decision about how good the cunning plan man and the budget is. They're making a decision. They've said overseas, I think we've got a chance here, and we go. And they said, well, what do you base that on? I said, you know, in Australia, they even let the criminals out. They go, the rapists, the murderers, the people, all these criminals, they should kick them out in the street. You know, this is great. You have to have a chance. Ducking down under for a prawn on the barbie now, let's jump in a boat and go.
I want to laugh, but I can't laugh because it's so true. And of course, once they're here, not only would you let the criminals out, Barnaby Joyce, we put them all on welfare and we find them a hotel or a motel to stay in. I'll leave it there. Good luck with budget night. I'll keep moving. Thank you, Barnaby Joyce. Right, let's bring in my panel now. Former Liberal MP, now candidate for Boothby in South Australia, Nicole Flynn. And Pauline Hanson's Chief of Staff, himself a candidate in the upcoming Queensland state election, James Ashby. Welcome to you both. James, budget night. What will you be looking for when you get your hands on the books?
Well, I'm keen to see what they've done with the NDIS. For 2 years now, this government have made promises that they're going to tackle those people who are rorting the system, certainly the fees and charges that have been applied to those who receive the benefits of NDIS, and of course those who are applicable or legally able to make application for NDIS. So their budget figures should tell us whether they're serious about those crackdowns this year, because don't forget, they've been in government for 2 years. This will be their last budget before the next election. I'm also keen to see how much money they've dedicated towards Queensland, because I think they'll be trying to help Stephen Miles here buy votes of Queenslanders by trying to put forward this sense that they're spending money in the state and it's all Labor. Whether or not we'll have money allocated for dams this year or not, because it was Anthony Albanese and Labor that took all the dams off the table when they came to government. And of course, I want to see Labor follow through on their commitment for a Royal Commission into COVID. They've got a year to do it. We'll see if they'll make that announcement tonight as well.
Nick, what are you going to be looking for? Because one of the questions I posed at the top of the show is the government's going to take money out of our pocket to try and buy us back and get our vote at the next election. I mean, question to you, what will you look for in the budget tonight? And do you think Australians can be bought off?
I don't think they can be bought off, Peter. And what I'm looking for is the big picture. How will this budget get cost of living under control? Because my community is hurting here. People are hurting all over Australia. And this is because of Labor's homegrown inflation. We have to make sure that the economy is growing faster than spending. So I'm looking for the big picture. Are Labor going to get its spending issues under control? Because I bet that they're not. And we will know in coming months whether inflation starts to drop or whether the poor old Reserve Bank will have to put up rates again to try to keep it under control, because Labor has not been holding up their end of the bargain, which is trying to get their inflation under control. And Peter, in the last 2 years, the federal Labor government added something like $209 billion of extra spending. It's out of control. They have to get it under control, but I don't think they will. So, as I said, I'm looking for the big picture. What does this mean for cost of living and making life easier for my local residents and people all over Australia?
James, all credit today to the Labor government in New South Wales. They're bringing in tough new bail reforms that will be supported by the coalition. So presumably they'll get through the parliament pretty quickly. There will be a presumption against bail for those accused of serious domestic violence. It means they'll have to demonstrate why it's safe to be let out. If they can't prove or can't convince the magistrate, they'll stay locked up, as they should. There'll be also more use of electronic monitoring. I hope it's not like the detainees that have been let out. That's been a farce, but it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'd love to have the contract for those electronic monitoring devices, because I think there's going to be a lot of people seen on the streets wearing these things moving forward in New South Wales. Look, the problem for New South Wales is whether they've got capacity in our prisons to actually lock up these serious offenders, especially repeat offenders of domestic violence. There's got to be some protection for those people who are suffering from domestic violence. It's not good enough that we let these people out and months later, or days later in some cases, they commit the most heinous of crimes where in the end a partner dies, and that's got to stop. So well done to New South Wales for stepping up.
Hey Nicole, it's been revealed today Sydney's Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras parade required over $1 million in bailout funds from the City of Sydney. It needs that money if it's going to stay afloat. They're also going to having the conversation that they're going to wind it back in terms of scale next year. It begs a question now, given gay marriage is legal. Has this event had its day?
Well, Peter, I think that it's very simple what's going on here. Like state and federal Labor governments, they just don't know how to manage their money, and they need to rein in their spending.
All right, just a quick one for you, James Ash, before we go. Can you believe that the unions were trying to, I mean, this is the CFMEU, millions and millions of dollars in the coffer. They were trying to sting employers for where the union delegate was located at work to pay for their iPads. Surely they can pay for their own iPads.
Oh, no, should have thrown in a Tesla while you're at it. This is the lunacy of the unions. I have been a business owner. Thankfully, I never had a unionised workplace, because it would have rubbed me the wrong way having to let anybody into my business that I didn't want their number one, let alone them dictate the terms of my business. So I say this is a good determination that's been handed down today. Well done. This is a victory for the small business owner.
Yeah, I'll be looking for the budget help there for small business tonight. We haven't heard much talk about small business from Labor. Enjoy budget night to the both of you. We'll catch up with you next week after the break. What can be done with so many remaining silent as racism grows across our university campuses? Be wary of this new inquiry. Plus, why you won't believe the PM's response in Parliament today. He was asked why he hasn't picked up the phone and rung President Xi. He then took a cheap shot at Andrew Hastie. I'll show you after the break. Welcome back. Tensions high. Israel looks set to go ahead with its invasion of Rafah, with considerable pushback now from the United States. We'll get to that. We'll get the latest on Trump and Biden. But first, I want to return to the growing abandonment this government has shown for Israel. Voting yes at the UN meant favouring a terrorist statelet, shunning an ally, and ending almost 8 decades, of bipartisan support. For more on this, I'm joined now by Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. Chris, we'll get into anti-Semitism here at home in a moment, but what did you make of that vote at the UN?
Well, Peter, that the Labor Party is moving further and further from its historic support of the State of Israel. Let's not forget that it was a Labor government, and it was led by its External Affairs Minister, Doc Everett, at the time, who was the President of the General Assembly, who voted for the partition of the state so that Israel could emerge. And so that was the Labor Party's original position. It's shifted a lot since then. I think you've seen this drift in the Labor Party at its national conferences since about 2006, where this question continually comes up. And I think where we stand at the moment is pretty much where the base of the Labor Party, its membership stands, and much of its caucus stands, which is essentially pro-Palestine. Now, the government can make an argument that what it was trying to do was saying it's affirming a two-state solution. But let's not kid ourselves. This is rewarding Hamas, because we wouldn't be having this vote if October 7 hadn't happened.
Look, given now Labor chooses its leader with a heavy vote from the party membership, and that point you make there about where the membership has shifted. Someone said to me, a Labor insider not so long ago, the days of the Labor right ever being leader are gone for all money. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Well, certainly the Labor right seems to have been hollowed out a lot, and in terms of support for Israel, I think you can now count the Victorians as still supporting the state of Israel, on the right, that is, of course, certainly not on the left. But in Queensland and New South Wales, I think they couldn't have drifted further from the state. And one of those reasons in New South Wales, of course, is there's large Muslim voting populations in some of those seats in Western Sydney, which they rely on so much. So part of it is the political gravity that they see, which is drawing them in that direction.
Look, we'll put Jennifer Westacott to one side, and now obviously today Deakin Uni, they're going hard after these pro-Palestinian encampments, they're called, now on campus. But now I'm a Melbourne Uni graduate, an ANU graduate. I've been appalled at the lack of ticker from our university leadership right around the country. Protesters today, they say that they're not going to back down, that they'll keep these encampments running. Have a listen.
We will not be complying with their request, and instead we're calling a rally to defend our encampment. What we've seen across the United States is that when police are brought in to smash up student protests, the student protests grow. More and more people flock to our cause. So that's a warning for Deakin, is that if they do bring in the police, they can expect the protest to expand, to grow, and to become stronger.
We heard reports too at ANU. There was a pro-Palestinian online Zoom, and someone there performed a Nazi salute. I want to note that the ANU's Chancellor, well, it's Julie Bishop. I saw her last night, the other day, front row at a Fashion Week event in Sydney, out there with the fashionistas. But she's a former foreign minister. I'm surprised she said so little on university anti-Semitism. I mean, where's Julie Bishop? Where's the leadership from her and others, Chris?
Yeah, well, Peter, you can't stop university students from protesting. I know I've been some pretty willing protests in my time, back in the 1990s at the ANU, and I can't even recall what that was about, but they occupied the Chancellor's office, and you certainly can't stop them protesting about this. What I think you can expect, though, is some firm words from the leadership of universities. Now, we've seen that from Jennifer Westacott, and I think that's a good thing, when this kind of speech crosses a line, and that's into hate speech, and that's what she has called out. I'd note that universities, it seems to me, are fairly sensitive when it comes to things that upset their students, but don't seem to be so on this particular issue. And on this, some of what we've seen is out and out anti-Semitism, and when we see that, that has to be called out. And that's what we mean by leadership. And of course, university students will protest, and you'll disagree and agree sometimes with the things they protest about. But leadership needs to be shown from those who are running these universities.
Yeah, and of course they're going into lecture theatres and they're doxing and they're photographing anyone who's supporting Israel. They're photographing Jewish students. So it's you know, they're picking one student body group over another student body group because the Jewish students, they're staying away from their courses and their lectures. I mean, they are scared to be on campus.
Yeah, and I've heard some terrible things too, and let's not mince words on this. When you talk about doxing, when you were talking about giving out somebody's phone number, you're only really doing it for one reason, and that is so that they can be on the receiving end of verbal and maybe even physical violence. So that absolutely should be seen as being beyond the pale by anyone who's running a university.
Hey, you wrote a fantastic column over the weekend in The Australian about the erosion of religious freedoms in this country. We were promised religious protection as part of that deal when marriage equality passed a little while back. I mean, 2016, it's a long while back. We've got nowhere in this whole debate. I think religious people of faith are feeling more vulnerable than ever. What's going on here, Chris?
Well, what we're seeing is an encroachment by the state and what people of faith are allowed to believe. We're essentially getting a state-based religion, and that state-based religion should remember where it comes from. And where it comes from is from Christian ideals. The idea of universal human rights is an avowedly Christian idea. In Paul's letter to the Galatians, where he talks about there being neither Jew nor Greek, nor free nor slave, nor man nor woman, except we're all one in Christ Jesus. That's the beginning of a conversation with people about the fact that there are such things as universal human rights. And the Christian tradition was bound in both faith and in reason, and that's what sets the liberal democracies on their road to what they are. That's what really animates Europe. And we've forgotten that. In fact, there are people who would be prepared to deny that. Now, I don't, again, deny the growth of a state-based sense of morality, but it should remember where it comes from, and also remember that the UN Declaration on Human Rights demands that there be religious freedom. That is something that we are yet to entrench in Australia, and it's something that's under threat from the state. We are seeing a state-based set of moralities now, which are telling people how they can educate their children and who should be allowed to educate their children, and that's not something that we should countenance.
Well, I urge my viewers at home, if they haven't read it already, to give it a read, Chris. It was a beautiful prose, but very powerful sentiment as well. Hey, I just noticed you're in Gladstone too. You're a long way north of Canberra. I suspect it's a bit warmer than Canberra this time of year. Any intel about what you're up to up there?
Yeah, look, I'm actually in Roma, you're right, on my way to Gladstone because I'm following the LNG pipeline from here to there. We went and saw some farmers today who are hosting wellheads on their properties. We've seen the hub where the gas gets pushed down to Gladstone. Let's not forget, Peter, where our money comes from. $75 billion liquid national gas exported from Australia last year. When you look at the effect that it has on budgets around Australia, and it's not just LNG, but of course it's coal and it's iron ore, but those commodities over the course of the last 20 years have lifted the revenue in the budget by $100 billion a year. So when you are looking at the things the government's handing out tonight, remember where your wealth comes from, remember where your food comes from, it comes from here.
Spot on, Chris Uhlmann. I can't wait to see what you do with all of that investigative work. We're very lucky here at Sky News. Thank you for your time. All right, let's bring in the international panel. We're about half an hour now from the Treasurer fronting the House of Representatives in Canberra to bring down his second budget. But before that, we'll get into some international issues. Sky News contributor Kosha Garda, former Labor MP Michael Danby. Well, welcome to you both. Michael, we'll get into Rafah with you in a moment. I'm keen on your take on what's happening there, but you are a very proud Labor man. Tell us how you felt over the weekend with that move by Penny Wong to basically reward Hamas for its horrors on October 7.
Wolkenkuckucksheim, which is the German word for a cloud cuckoo land. Why now? Burke, Clare, Husick and the Socialist left are all pushing the government towards rewarding Hamas, which wants a unitary Muslim state from the river to the sea, or the Palestinian Authority that pays a third of its budget. An economist like Kosha would be interested in this, a third of its budget to pay for slay terrorists. And Australia used to have the sensible policy in the past. We don't decide these things from over here. We let the parties negotiate between themselves. We should have been with the United States and Papua New Guinea in voting against, or at least with Canada and the United Kingdom and Germany, and abstaining. I mean, I don't believe the ignorance that these people have. Penny Wong, President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton, all did peace plans with the Palestinians for a two-state solution, and each time the Palestinians ran away. You can't erase history. You're not those guys who have the magic pens and you erase our memory. These things all happened. And the reason there isn't support for a two-state solution in Israel or among sensible people around the world is because the Palestinians, supported by our government now, have run away from it each time. It's got to be negotiated between the parties. We're not going to impose Penny Wong's will from Australia.
Kosha, the PM, I watched Question Time today, and the PM wasn't too happy when he was asked a question by Andrew Hastie as to why he hadn't spoken to Xi Jinping regarding that incident with an Australian naval helicopter. Have a listen.
Why hasn't the Prime Minister called President Xi about these clear acts of intimidation?
Why doesn't the opposition back up Australia? This is about our national interests.
Order, members on my left.
This mob who never had a phone call, let alone a meeting, during their entire last term in office. I would have thought that that was not a hard ask for you to say, yes, we agree, we are at one. We are at one in defending the Australian Defence Force, rather than trying to send confusing messages to the People's Republic of China.
Now, two things here struck me, Kosher. Andrew Hastie really got under his skin with that question. But secondly, pretty bloody rich to have a crack at a bloke that's been in our uniform for the SAS in Afghanistan and demand of him, what are you going to do about defending Australia? Why aren't you standing with the government on this sort of stuff? I mean, you can't ask that of a veteran when you're someone like Albanese who can't even pick up the phone to defend our naval pilot in this circumstance.
Very true. I think you put your finger on it there. For sure, Peter, that Hastie did get under his skin. I think that came across quite evidently with the animated response, and I think that probably coloured where that commentary came from, and obviously didn't land given who he was speaking to on the other side. I think it was a very reasonable question. It's a good thing it was asked. More people, including in the media, by the way, should be asking harder hitting questions of our leaders. And it would appear to many that there just isn't really clarity, certainly with the PM, but in fairness to him, with many elected leaders over a wide span of time, there does not appear to be clarity in what the position, Australia's position really is, and what the strategy should be with respect to China. Because if there is clarity on that, is it a contained and limited partnership? Are there red lines that we will not allow to be crossed? Is it a managed concession in certain aspects because of the reality of the situation and how much leverage each party has? What is it? And if there's clarity in those positions, then downstream from that, you would see clarity in the words that are spoken when you're standing up to the leaders, as well as, more importantly, the actions and, our policy stance as it relates to immigration or trade reciprocity or any number of things where we could be leveling the playing field and, exercising what we think our strategy is. And it seems a little bit all over the place, and that comes through in moments like these.
I think Labor's strategy right now in China is shut up and take the money. I think it's that simple, Kosher. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. Let's go to the US, Michael. Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Well, he's given evidence in the Hush Money trial, claiming that he was aware of the payments. Everything's required. Mr. Trump signed off. On top of that, I wanted the money back, Cohen told the court. Outside the court, Trump took aim, though, at the judge.
We have a corrupt judge, and we have a judge who's highly conflicted, and he's keeping me from campaigning. You know who appointed him? Democrat politicians.
I don't know if this is working against him or for him, because, every single day he's getting in the headlines, he's getting all of this vision, it's running on the newses. What do you think, Michael, for or against him? Is it working for Trump or not?
Well, let's not just listen to you or me, Peter, but Fareed Zakaria, who's a famous Liberal host of CNN, and Bill Maher, who's the very funny US comedian, middle-of-the-road centrist, also smaller Liberal, both are saying that this lawfare is backfiring. On the weekend, hardly reported by the mainstream media, 100,000 people gathered on the Jersey Shore for a Trump rally. Now, I don't support Trump's personality, but they should be discussing the issues. He shouldn't be in court. He should be out there being able to debate Biden. I cannot believe that Biden will be allowed to contest this election. His falling abilities. He nearly caused a revolution in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands by accusing them of being cannibals. That he'll be allowed to contest. Gavin Newsom, where are you when you're needed? In August, the Chicago Convention takes place, and I think Trump is ahead in all the swing states. This is emerging as a catastrophe for the Democrats unless they replace Biden.
Coach, I'll finish with you because I'm picking up that point there. Joe Biden, crazy stuff, out cracking jokes about his own competency. Have a listen.
My name's Joe Biden. I work for Kamala Harris. I asked her to be my vice president because I knew I needed somebody smarter than me.
I mean, you don't joke about something like that, do you?
No, and sadly, just picking up what Michael said, everybody I think will just relegate it to another day and another gaffe, joke, comment by President Biden that doesn't land. It would land maybe if somebody is known to be a very, very strong leader and they made a cute joke in the right context. It doesn't land when one of the biggest things he's fighting is the fact that he comes across as a very weak leader, and then making a joke about your weakness doesn't quite do it. There's another really quick meta point that I would say as well, that it's also this whole thing about mocking masculinity in favor of strong women is something that I think reflects a trend in the culture. I'm all for female empowerment, but not at the expense of men. And I think he was doing that as well. That doesn't quite land with a lot of his constituents.
Yeah, he's got to be careful. Men actually vote too. All right, I'll leave it there. See you both next week. After the break, we'll get into some of the technical details of Labor's budget that shows very little's being done to pay off Australia's massive debt. Plus the irony, tonight we'll have energy relief handed out in this budget. But the mess we're in comes from Labor's policy making. Right, about 20 minutes now, Jim Chalmers will get to his feet in the House and bring down the budget, including his $9 billion surplus. Now, on face value, that might sound great, but the devil's always in the detail with budgets. Joining me now to get some detail, Nationals Senator Matt Canavan. I meant what I said. It sounds impressive if you're at home. $9 billion's a lot of money, and it's the first time, of course, we've had consecutive surpluses since the Peter Costello era. But this is no Costello surplus, is it, Matt? It's not structural, meaning it's not a permanent surplus. It's a rounding error, and it does absolutely nothing to pay off debt.
Well, you're right, Peter. The key thing to keep in mind is that a surplus just gives the government a little bit of money to pay back the massive debt that we have accumulated. That gross debt is now sitting at $941 billion next financial year. So this $9 billion surplus, when you put that into context, it's less than 1% of our total debt. So put it in your terms in your own home. If you say owed $500,000 on your mortgage, tonight's budget gives you $5,000 to pay back that debt. It's not a big deal. You've still got 99% of the mortgage to pay off. We've still got 99% of the debt we're left with. And as you say, in the years coming forward, the projections are for budget deficits of 20, even $30 billion potentially, wiping out all the little savings we've made in these last couple of years that the Treasurer wants some credit for.
I'll tell people at home you're a trained economist, you're a former official of the Productivity Commission. Put your old hat back on. Who's right on inflation? The Reserve Bank, who says it's a continuing problem, or the Treasurer, who says, don't worry about it?
Well, you judge people by their form, don't you? And last year, the Treasurer put down a budget and he forecast that this financial year, inflation would be just 3.25%, 3.25%. Well, we've had 3 of the first 4 quarters of this financial year. We're 3/4 of the way through, and inflation's running at an annual rate of 3.7%, well above what the Treasurer predicted, and actually accelerated in the March quarter. The last quarter actually was running at an annualised rate of over 4%. And so for the Treasurer to meet his prediction last year, he'd need inflation to come in under 2% for the last quarter of this financial year. That's not going to happen. So his promise is already broken. And now he's telling us that he's going to deliver an inflation rate of under 3% by Christmas. Well, you couldn't believe the promise he made a year ago. I don't think he's going to beat Santa Claus to Christmas this year. The inflation is looking like it's going to be a lot higher than 3%. The RBA says 3.8%. I think they're a lot more trustworthy.
Matt, what about this claim from the ACTU that wage rises for aged care workers and childcare workers, which the Treasurer has flagged, he says he's got billions in the budget for them tonight, they say it won't be inflationary. Now, when I learn a bit of economics, wage increases to those on low or middle incomes always get spent, almost always get spent. So it is inflationary. These clowns are making it up as they go along.
Well, look, I do think people deserve a pay increase here. It's not the low and middle income earners that have caused this inflation fire to get out of control. It's this government spending. They are spending $70 billion more next financial year, based on what was the projections when they came to government. And those spending projections are already high because of COVID. They've added $70 billion extra for just 1 year since they came to government. They are fueling this inflation fire. Now, if these wage increases were the result of negotiated outcomes between workers and private sector businesses, fair enough. But what's happening here is the government's coming along and topping up these, paying these, because they know the businesses themselves would not be able to afford it. They're using taxpayer dollars to do that. And that is and could be very inflationary by going above and beyond what the market can bear, what customers can pay for. So, as I say, people are going to need pay rises because inflation's been running hot. But we shouldn't have the government come in and make a bad situation worse like the government's doing here.
Yeah, but we already subsidise the children to be in the childcare centre. These are privately run businesses. Yes, some are not for profit, but some absolutely are for profit.
Yeah.
Why are taxpayers looking to pay the wages of privately employed staff?
Well, because I think that the reason why, I believe, is this government has no other plan to lift people's wages. They are not investing in better infrastructure to help increase our productivity. They're not lowering red tape and regulations. They're not lowering taxes to attract government investment. They're the ways you would traditionally try to seek to improve productivity and deliver a real wage increase to all workers, including those on low and middle incomes. Instead here, because the government is actually adding regulations, increasing taxes, they have to go down the route of trying to directly subsidise people's wages in a desperate attempt to give themselves a boost in the polls before an election. It's using your money, your taxpayers' money, adding to that $940 billion debt, taking it to $1 trillion and adding that fuel to just put more inflation into the economy in the years ahead.
I'll have to leave it there. Matt, I've got an eye on the clock. The Treasurer's on his feet in 15 minutes' time. Thank you as always. All right, long now, as I said, before he gets to his feet in the House. Obviously, I'll have a lot more to say when I've gone through the papers myself here tomorrow night on Credlin. But one thing's for certain, Australians are doing it tough. They want cost of living relief. Here's a bit of what people were expecting from the Treasurer early today.
Lower utility bills and lower supermarket deals as well, because the cost of living is just unbelievable these days.
More money for the kids.
Do you think
and the dog and the cat?
Housing, yeah, definitely.
More money in people's pockets obviously is going to transfer to us, so that's a big plus. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Education, I'm a teacher.
I think butter is way too expensive. Like, I shouldn't be paying like $8 for butter. Like, that's like like a $7 piece of toast.
Cost of living, and specifically around Melbourne, homeless, things like that.
Our rent is going up consistently. Every food shop costs more and more money.
I'm with you on that Western Star cost inflation. That's my favourite butter and it is expensive. Let's go, though, to comments again today from economists. More and more are raising concerns about Labor's future-based Australia manufacturing policy. Consulting giant Deloitte, they've analysed the policy ahead of the budget and they are warning it is unlikely to stack up because it will impose economic costs that outweigh the economic benefits. An independent economist, expert Chris Richardson, says subsidising sectors like solar panels, where Australia is unlikely to be competitive with countries like China, is the equivalent, says Chris Richardson, of asking taxpayers to smoke $100 notes. For more on this, I'm joined now by Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Ted O'Brien. Well, Ted, they don't mince their words, asking taxpayers to smoke $100 notes there. That's what this policy is. Do you agree with Chris Richardson?
I think he's on the money, Peter. I mean, the only thing made in Australia under Labor is homegrown inflation, and that'll only get worse as they continue down this path. Now, a lot of people don't even know what Made in Australia policy is under Labor. We're all still trying to work out, but what it seems to be is just a policy of picking winners. But if you're in the game of picking winners, well, you're also picking losers. And Australians aren't mugs. They'll work out on what side of the ledger they fall under Albanese. Is he making them winners or losers? Are they going to be wealthier or poorer come the next election, will they feel as though their life has been made easier or harder? I know the answer to that, and I suspect the Australian people will too by the time of the next election.
I'll draw my viewers' attention to the bottom of the screen there. You can see the Treasurer walking from his suite at Parliament House in the ministerial wing. He's just about to cross the little bridge there into the House of Reps. His wife Laura's with him and their children. There we go. It's up there on the screen. It's a bit of a hike. It will take a bit of time. It's due there at 7:30. Let's go to energy relief if I can, Ted. I just played some Voxy, some comments from people today on the street. They say they want energy relief. They want it front and centre. But I mean, this is ambulance at the bottom of a cliff stuff. This is treating the symptoms with handouts tonight, not the cause of the high prices, isn't it?
Peter, it's very much trying to treat bullet wounds with Band-Aids. You can hardly blame the Australian people. They are on their knees at the moment because of this cost of living crisis Labor's created. But the problem is they continue to fail to deal with the cause. We need more supply coming into the energy market. I mean, within 10 years, 90% of our baseload power will exit the grid. By next winter, we are going to be suffering severe gas shortfalls. Now, they put all their eggs in one basket, a renewables-only approach, but even their renewables policy has now stalled. This means prices will only get worse and we will have severe blackouts. So what's the answer? Supply, supply, supply. Instead, from Labor, it's Band-Aid, 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 and that's the problem, and we'll wait to see what comes tonight. Of course, the Coalition wants to ensure that the Australian people get all the support they can, but from a public policy point of view, it's high time Labor start focusing on supply. It's all about supply.
Last night, Ted, I spoke with Aidan Morrison from the Centre for Independent Studies about what is effectively a carbon tax by stealth. This is done via regulation, so not even the courtesy of legislation that we as the public would see in the Parliament that would be debated and ventilated and argued about. It will impose a new carbon price of $66 a tonne. That's double what the Gillard carbon tax was obviously going to hit consumers. How concerned are you and the Coalition about this?
We're enormously concerned, Peter. I mean, you know better than most the impacts of a carbon tax, and despite Prime Minister Gillard's flaws in some regards, at least unlike Anthony Albanese, she was clear. By the end, she ended up conceding this was really a carbon tax. These guys are doing it by stealth. It goes to the lack of transparency and the weakness of Albanese's leadership. If he was to introduce a carbon tax, he should have had the strength of character to face the Australian people and tell them, prosecute the case, allow it to go under scrutiny within Parliament, allow the debate to be had. But no, they have not done that. It's by stealth, and it's going to end up on your network bill at home.
Shadow Energy Minister there, Ted O'Brien, thank you for your time. Good luck budget night. And the address and reply, of course, from Peter Dutton on Thursday night. Quick break. We're about, 8 minutes away from the budget coming down. I'll join you on the other side. Welcome back. Budget now, only minutes away. Joining me, Sky News host, Chief Election Analyst Tom Connell. Well, we talked a lot about the numbers and all the economic parameters tonight, Tom, but this is, when you boil it down, a really important political speech for a government. They're trailing in the polls. A lot of pressure on Jim Chalmers tonight to turn around Labor's fortunes. It's all about the narrative. What are we looking for tonight? What are you expecting?
He's going to emphasise that he knows times are tough, the government's helping, but in a responsible way. We will hear responsible a lot tonight in two elements. On the budget side of things, that's where he'll stress there's another surplus, albeit bigger deficits in the future. How much they'll be, we'll find out in a couple of minutes' time. They were going to be $73 billion over that 3-year period. How much bigger are they going to be because of not reining in costs such as the NDIS? So responsible, he'll say, on the budget, even though those longer-term years are not as good. And also on inflation. And this is a crucial element right now, isn't it? Is Jim Chalmers right? Was the RBA right? Is Jim Chalmers right? Or is the Coalition right on inflation? And does this budget risk at all inflation? There's a lot of economists debating that already, Peter. The narrative from Jim Chalmers is responsible help. But, for example, the new measure we're going to hear in a moment from Jim Chalmers, that hasn't been announced before today is there's going to be energy relief for all households. Last time around, it was only for lower income ones, including people on New Start, pensioners, people with health cards. This time it's for everybody. And so far, we've heard that the government's having to go it alone too, so that does cost money. So this is going to be crucial to Labor's fortunes. If they can land this budget, it's not inflationary, people say, well done, maybe there are some rate cuts coming. If people spend that money anyway, because remember, they're not spending it on rent, they're not spending on power, they spend it anyway, and it keeps inflation higher, that's when Labor will have a problem. I thought it was fascinating too, Peter, that in the question time, the coalition, they went to the Ronald Reagan line. Are you better off now than when you started Labor's time in office? Because even if things are improving, perhaps, if there's one rate cut, there's been a lot of rate increases. If you're a mortgage holder, if you're a renter, things are undeniably tougher since the 2022 election. You can debate whose fault that is. That's what the coalition wants to get back to, that are you better off or otherwise question that Ronald Reagan famously posed in the 1980s.
Well, it's the right place for the coalition to go, because we know in per capita terms, even when the government likes to point at the underlying sort of global numbers or national GDP numbers, we know people are hurting on a per capita basis. We are in a per capita recession. They can't dice that any other way. That's why people at home are doing it tough. Interestingly now, I want people at home to understand too, I mean, every single word in the speech tonight we'll hear from Jim Chalmers is weighted. Every word is carefully chosen. There'll be repetition of phrases and language. It'll all be tested with focus groups. A lot of the party strategists will have had their say. This is about as important to the government as that speech prime ministers give when they launch an election campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Every word. What is he emphasising? What's he talking up? Maybe what he's avoiding saying as well, Peter, will be carefully passed here, because this is a lot of attention on this. You don't get forever. The budget does dissipate. What will people remember out of tonight matters as well when they're thinking about things over the next year. We're in the countdown to an election now. So what is he emphasising? Yes, there will be new measures and they'll get the initial attention, but how much will people actually remember in the days to come? How much will they think they're helped by this? And how much can Jim Chalmers convince them that he's helping them out of some tough times?
Yeah, we can see there we've got the opposition leader at the dispatch box on his side. We've got Jim Chalmers there wandering a little, a few more stragglers to come in. The galleries, of course, are full. They're usually stacked to the rafters with party faithful. We know, of course, Peter Dutton will give the address in reply on Thursday. The opposition front bench will have been in its own lockup all today, analysing the budget numbers, as the media have. And, of course, your colleagues will be here on Sky News after we hear from the Treasurer. We're about a minute away, maybe even less. You're going to get your hands on the books as soon as he gets to speak to Tom?
Yeah, I'll duck in. It's always good to sort of watch the speech unfold, and you get the takes straight away. So my colleagues, all the people, our viewers are used to watching, they've looked at this for hours. They'll know. They'll be able to drill down straight away what this means for you, your business, your household, and of course the overall finances. So I'm looking forward to going in there. They always give a quick.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap you up now. I've got the Speaker in the chair. Here we go. Budget 2024.